You know how sometimes you think you have a handle on something like a book everyone talks about,
Yeah.
but then you actually dive in and it's just a whole other world. That's kind of what happened when we looked at the excerpts from Leviticus you sent in.
Ah, right. Leviticus.
Forget just, dusty old rules.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really detailed account of how ancient Israel defined their relationship with the divine and, well, structured their entire community.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, I think, is how these ancient instructions give us such a deep look into a very specific cultural and religious framework.
Mhm.
We're exploring the King James Version here, as you mentioned, and our goal in this deep dive is, well, to really get under the skin of these chapters.
Right.
The different kinds of offerings, those intricate rituals, the ideas around purity, their social guidelines.
So kind of unpacking it all.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to understanding a foundational text,
Mm.
getting the key insights without, getting totally bogged down.
Okay, good. So let's jump right into the offerings, chapters 1 through 7. It's not just about giving something, is it? It's like the specific way, what was given, and crucially why.
Precisely. Offerings were absolutely central to their connection with God. They served various purposes, from making amends for sin, what they called atonement,
Atonement, right.
to simply expressing thankfulness or devotion. We see a really structured system here. It's almost like a catalog of devotion.
So first up are the burnt offerings. That's Leviticus 1 and then more in 6. This feels like a core practice.
It really is.
You've got cattle, sheep, goats, even birds, but always male, and crucially without any flaws, without blemish.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
And the ritual itself is quite involved. I mean, the person placing their hand on the animal's head,
Mm-hmm.
the priest sprinkling blood all around the altar, then the skinning and cutting.
Yes, and what's striking is that level of detail. It really emphasizes the seriousness and the intentionality behind the act.
Yeah.
The phrase, "sweet savor unto the Lord," comes up again and again. It suggests this complete burning was a way of showing total devotion, total surrender. A core principle, really, in their relationship with the divine.
And the specifics you mentioned, washing the internal organs and legs, the priests carefully arranging everything on a wood fire.
A fire that burned all night, remember?
Right, all night.
Right.
The priests had a very active role, didn't they? Handling the blood, managing that fire.
Definitely. They were the mediators in this process.
Then we get to the meat offerings or grain offerings, Leviticus 2 and 6 again.
Right.
Here, it shifts from animals to, well, fine flour, oil, and frankincense.
Correct.
But there were different ways to prepare it, right?
Yeah.
Some unleavened and cooked in a pan, some fried, and even offerings from the very first grains harvested.
Exactly right. This variety likely reflects different kinds of offerings, maybe different levels of resources people had, or perhaps specific occasions called for different types.
Makes sense.
And the memorial portion burned on the altar again. That sweet savor idea symbolized the part given to God.
While the rest actually became food for Aaron and his sons, which highlights the provision built into the system for the priesthood.
Ah, interesting.
And the mandatory use of salt, it's described as the salt of the covenant, that really underscores the enduring nature, the permanence of their relationship with God.
And no leaven or honey in the fire offerings.
Correct. Leaven and honey were prohibited in offerings made by fire, though first fruits were offered, just not burnt in that way.
Okay. Next are the peace offerings in Leviticus 3 and 7. These feel a bit different. Still animals, yeah.
Still animals, yes.
But they could be male or female, and the reasons seemed broader: Thanksgiving, fulfilling a vow, or just a voluntary thing.
Yes, and importantly, not the entire animal was burned this time.
Right.
What's significant with the peace offerings is the shared element. While specific fats were burned, creating that sweet savor.
The best parts, perhaps.
Arguably, yes, the richest parts went to the altar, but then the breast and the right shoulder were given to the priests.
And the person making the offering actually got to eat the rest.
So like a communal meal almost.
It really fostered a sense of community and shared blessing. But there were strict rules. That one about not eating fat or blood. It's called a perpetual statute.
Meaning forever.
Exactly. Intended as a fundamental law within their covenant. And the rules about when the remaining meat could be eaten, same day for Thanksgiving, maybe the next day for vows or voluntary offerings, but anything left on the third day had to be burned. It suggests a need for, well, timely consumption and respect for the sacred nature of the offering. No leftovers hanging around.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to Leviticus 4, 5, and 6. The sin offerings. This is where it gets really specific, doesn't it?
Extremely specific.
It's different procedures depending on who it's in, the high priest, the whole community, a leader, or just, an ordinary person.
Hmm.
And it was specifically for sins committed unintentionally through ignorance.
Yes, that's a key distinction. This highlights their understanding that even unintentional mistakes, things done out of ignorance, required a way to make things right atonement.
So you couldn't just say, oops, didn't mean to.
Well, you could, but you still had to deal with the consequences ritually. The varying rituals based on social standing likely reflect the hierarchical structure of the community, different levels of responsibility before God.
Right. The priest's sin affected everyone more, perhaps.
Potentially, yes. And the meticulous handling of the blood, sprinkling it before the sanctuary veil in some cases, dabbing it on the altar horns, pouring the rest at the base, it underscores the powerful role blood played in purification in their worldview.
And sometimes the animal's body was taken outside the camp.
Yes, in certain cases, like for the priest or the whole congregation's sin offering, it symbolized the complete removal of sin from the community.
And the related trespass offering. That dealt with sins against holy things or breaking commandments unknowingly.
That's right. And it added that interesting element of making amends, restitution, plus adding a fifth of the value. So paying back more than what was wronged.
Okay, and the trespass offerings, with more detail in Leviticus 6 and 7, seem focused on specific wrongdoings against both God and other people, like lying, deceit, theft.
Exactly. The trespass offering acts as a bridge, you could say, between the spiritual and the social. It's not just about seeking forgiveness from God, but also about correcting the wrongs done to others in the community. That requirement of restitution, plus the 20%, shows a real commitment to justice and reconciliation.
And again, the priests got their portion.
Yes, the priests had their designated portions, emphasizing their role and their sustenance being tied to these offerings.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Leviticus 8 through 10. This is where we see the establishment of the priesthood itself, the consecration of Aaron and his sons by Moses.
A pivotal moment.
And it's a pretty elaborate process, washing specific clothing, anointing oil, and then a whole series of offerings just for this occasion.
Yes, this consecration ritual was absolutely vital. It formally established the authority and the role of the priests as the mediators between God and the people.
Setting them apart.
Exactly. The detailed steps, the anointing oil poured on Aaron's head, the blood applied to his right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe. It symbolized the dedication of their hearing, their actions, their entire path, really, to God's service.
And they had to stay in the tabernacle for 7 days.
That's right, a 7-day confinement, emphasizing a period of intense preparation and being set apart for this incredibly sacred role.
Then, on the 8th day, Aaron performs the first sacrificial offerings. It seems like, okay, things are working, a successful start.
It seems that way.
Until Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, decide to do their own thing with strange fire.
Yes. A jarring event.
And the consequences are immediate and deadly.
It's a really stark reminder, isn't it, of the importance of obedience and following the precisely prescribed ways of worship in their system.
You couldn't just improvise.
Apparently not. Their transgression highlights the perceived sanctity of God's commands and the potential dangers of unauthorized practices.
And the instructions that follow are also quite severe about mourning, not leaving the tabernacle, not drinking wine while serving.
Yes, it further emphasizes the seriousness and the specific demanding requirements of being a priest. And from this point on, the priests had this central teaching responsibility to distinguish between what is holy and unholy, clean and unclean.
Which leads us nicely into Leviticus 11 through 15. This section goes deep into those ideas of purity and impurity.
Very deep.
We get those, famous lists of clean and unclean animals, what you could eat and what was absolutely forbidden. It's not just about hygiene, is it? It seems more symbolic.
Not entirely about hygiene, no. While there might have been some practical health benefits in some cases, the main purpose seems to have been about setting boundaries, reinforcing the distinct identity of the Israelite people.
Like marking them out.
Precisely. The categories land animals with divided hooves and that chew the cud, water creatures with fins and scales being clean, while others were considered abominations, it created this system of symbolic order. It defined their world.
And even touching the dead bodies of unclean animals made you impure.
Yes, impurity could be contracted through contact.
Then there's the purification after childbirth in Leviticus 12. A woman was considered ritually impure for a period after giving birth. Longer for a girl than a boy, interestingly.
Yes, that difference is noted.
And there were restrictions, not touching holy things, not entering the sanctuary, followed by specific offerings to restore her purity.
Right. This concept of ritual impurity after childbirth, while maybe seeming unusual to us today, likely reflected an understanding of the significant physical changes, maybe the vulnerability, associated with the process. It marked a transition, the differing lengths of impurity. Well, they've been interpreted in various ways, but the key point is the need for ritual purification before she could be fully reintegrated into community worship and access sacred spaces. The offerings symbolize that restoration and cleansing.
And then leprosy, or maybe more accurately, various skin diseases, as described in Leviticus 13 and 14. These also led to a state of impurity.
A very serious one.
The procedures for identifying and dealing with these conditions were incredibly detailed, involving the priest, quarantine, and these really elaborate cleansing rituals if the person recovered.
Yes, it seems leprosy in this context was viewed not just as a medical issue, but also perhaps as a sign of divine disfavor or a profound form of impurity that isolated the person.
So the priest acted almost like a health inspector and a spiritual guide.
In a way, yes. The priest's role as the one who diagnosed and oversaw the cleansing highlights how tightly the physical and the spiritual were connected in their thinking.
And that cleansing ritual itself, 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet thread, hyssop, running water.
It's complex, very symbolic, representing purification, perhaps even resurrection to community life, renewal, and similar rules apply to clothing and even houses affected by leprosy or mold, emphasizing how pervasive impurity could be perceived.
Wow. Okay, and Leviticus 15 deals with bodily discharges, both from men and women. Again, these led to a state of uncleanness.
That's correct.
With rules about contact, things becoming unclean if touched, and specific cleansing rituals needed to regain purity, all to prevent defiling the tabernacle.
These regulations really underscore the importance they placed on bodily integrity and purity, especially when approaching the sacred.
Everything had to be right.
It seems so. The detailed rules about contact with people experiencing discharges and the subsequent cleansing rituals, washing, bathing, offerings, highlight the need for both physical and ritual purification. The stated goal is quite clear: to separate the Israelites from their uncleanness, to protect the sanctity of God's dwelling place among them.
Which brings us to chapter 16 and the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. This sounds like a really big deal.
Oh, it was the most solemn day of the entire year. A truly significant event.
Aaron, the high priest, wearing very specific linen garments, not his usual fancy ones.
Right, signifying humility, perhaps.
Performed this detailed ritual involving 2 goats. One was sacrificed, and the other, the scapegoat, was sent out into the wilderness carrying the sins of the people.
Exactly. The Day of Atonement was this comprehensive cleansing ritual for the entire community, the priests, and the sanctuary itself. Once a year, a total reset.
And the casting of lots for the 2 goats.
Yes, one for the Lord, one for Ezel, or the scapegoat. Then the high priest uniquely enters the most holy place, the inner sanctum, with incense and the blood of the sacrificed animals, sprinkling the blood on and before the mercy seat, and the confession of all the community's sins symbolically placed onto the head of the live goat,
The scapegoat.
which was then led away into the wilderness. These were incredibly powerful symbolic acts aimed at reconciliation with God and purification of the people and the sacred space.
And it was a day of complete rest, afflicting your souls.
Yes, fasting and solemn observance, emphasizing the gravity of sin and the need for atonement.
Then we move into what's often called the Holiness Code, Leviticus 17 through 20. Here, the focus seems to broaden out to more general, ethical, and moral behavior.
That's a good way to put it.
With that repeated phrase, that refrain, "Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy."
Yes, that's the core theme. This section extends beyond just ritual purity, which we've been talking about, to cover moral and ethical conduct as part of holiness.
So things like rules about slaughtering animals only at the tabernacle, the prohibition against offering sacrifices to other gods or devils.
Right. And the strong prohibition against eating blood, based on the idea that the life is in the blood and it's reserved for atonement on the altar.
And then those detailed lists of forbidden sexual relations, incest, adultery, homosexuality, bestiality.
Yes. Defining clear boundaries for family and sexual relationships. Also, prohibitions against practices like child sacrifice, Molech, or consulting mediums. It all contributes to this wider understanding of holiness as including both ritual and ethical purity.
And the consequences for disobedience sound severe, the land itself being defiled, vomiting out inhabitants.
The text portrays the consequences as extremely severe, yes, being cut off from the people, or even the land itself rejecting them. It ties obedience directly to their ability to live securely in the Promised Land.
Okay, then the rules for priests get even more specific in Leviticus 21 and 22. Restrictions on who they could mourn for, who they could marry, even physical requirements.
Physical blemishes could disqualify them from active service at the altar?
It all seems designed to maintain their, I guess, elevated status and fitness for service.
Exactly. These regulations emphasize the exceptionally high standards expected of those serving so closely to the divine presence. Their role as intermediaries required them to maintain a state of exceptional ritual purity and moral integrity.
Set apart in every way.
That seems to be the idea. The specific prohibitions and qualifications ensured they were set apart for their sacred duties and could represent the people before God appropriately without bringing any impurity or defect near.
Interesting, though, that even if they had a blemish and couldn't offer sacrifices, they could still eat the holy food.
Yes, it shows a nuance.
Yeah.
Disqualified from certain actions, but not entirely excluded from the provisions of the priesthood.
Leviticus 23 then lays out the holy days, the appointed rhymes for specific observances throughout the year. It's like a religious calendar.
It is exactly that, a sacred calendar.
You've got the weekly Sabbath, of course, then Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread right after.
Commemorating the Exodus.
Then the Feast of First Fruits, offering the first harvest sheaf, counting 50 days to the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, with its own offerings.
Celebrating the main harvest.
Then later in the year, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement again, which we discussed, and finally the Feast of Tabernacles, living in booths for a week.
Recalling their journey through the wilderness, these feasts and holy days were absolutely central to the religious life of Israel. They marked significant events in their history with God and provided regular opportunities for communal worship, remembrance, and, well, celebration too.
And each had its own specific rituals and significance.
Definitely. And even within the Harvest Festival instructions, you find that command to leave the corners of the fields, the gleanings, for the poor and the stranger.
Ah, so social justice woven into the religious calendar.
Exactly. A social awareness embedded right into their core religious practices.
Okay, finally, Leviticus 24 through 27 cover a variety of other laws. It feels like a bit of a collection of important principles at the end.
It does tie up several threads, yes.
Things like keeping the lamps burning in the tabernacle, the showbread on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Then laws about blasphemy, which was taken very seriously.
Punishable by death, according to the text.
And the law of retaliation, eye for eye.
Often interpreted as aiming for proportionate justice, preventing escalating vengeance rather than literal maiming in every case, but certainly emphasizing fairness.
Then the sabbatical year, letting the land rest every 7th year, and the year of Jubilee every 50th year, proclaiming liberty, returning land to original owners.
That sounds radical. It was a radical concept, yes. Aimed at preventing permanent poverty and land accumulation, promoting social equity over the long term, along with rules about treating the poor fairly, no usury, just weights and measures.
And rules about bondservants, too.
Yes, regulating servitude, ensuring eventual release for Israelites. These final chapters address various aspects of community life, social justice, economic practice, and ongoing devotion.
Then chapter 26 has those powerful warnings and promises. Blessings for obedience, rain, harvests, peace, God's presence, but severe threats for disobedience, terror, disease, famine, defeat, exile.
It highlights the conditional nature of the covenant as presented here. Obedience brings blessing, disobedience brings judgment.
But there's also a promise of restoration even after judgment, if they confess and humble themselves.
Yes, that conditional promise of return is crucial. It shows that even within the framework of judgment, the possibility of repentance and restoration remains.
And finally, chapter 27 deals with vows and tithes, how to value things dedicated to God, the rules around redeeming them, and the principle of the tithe belonging to the Lord.
Providing structures for personal commitments and the financial support of the sanctuary and priesthood. And the book concludes by stating these are the commandments given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, reinforcing their divine origin and authority.
Wow. Okay, so we've really gone through an incredibly detailed picture of ancient Israelite life and worship, all from the sources you shared. It's a lot.
It is dense, no question.
We've looked at how the offerings were this complex, multi-layered way of connecting with the divine. The careful establishment and specific role of the priests, the vital importance of purity, ritual and physical, and how to deal with impurity, the rhythm of their year marked by those holy days, and the broader social and ethical rules that were meant to guide their entire community, making them holy.
I think what's particularly striking, and maybe even surprising when you really dig in, is the sheer detail in addressing different kinds of sin and impurity.
Yeah, the categories.
The distinction between unintentional acts and deliberate wrongdoing, for example, and the specific rituals designed for each, it reveals a really sophisticated, albeit ancient, understanding of human fallibility and the need for both making amends and restoring relationships with God and within the community.
And that scapegoat image is hard to forget.
The concept of the scapegoat, symbolically carrying the confessed sins right out of the community, yes, it's a particularly powerful and enduring image. And the meticulous categorization of clean and unclean animals, while strange to us, really prompts us to think about their symbolic meaning and the worldview they represented. What made their world ordered and sacred?
It's definitely a text that requires, well, deep attention. But hopefully this deep dive has given you, our listener, a more structured and understandable overview of this complex material, hitting the key takeaways and maybe sparking some insights without feeling totally overwhelming.
Absolutely, and perhaps it raises a thought-provoking question for you to consider. Looking at these ancient practices, the rituals, the purity laws, the social ethics, what aspects perhaps unexpectedly connect or resonate with modern ideas? Maybe about ritual itself, or community responsibility, or even our own personal ethics. This incredibly detailed system of rules offers a glimpse into a world with a very different understanding of what is sacred and what is not, what connects us to the divine and what separates us. What does that ultimately tell us, maybe, about the enduring human need to define our place in the world and our relationship with something beyond ourselves?